Okay, great. I think we get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining in. Welcome to the 14th edition now of the Uday Knowledge Sessions, brought to you by Mumbai FinTech Hub and PwC. I do see a lot of known names in the attendee list, but there are also quite a few of you joining us the first time. So we'll just quickly introduce you all to the different people who put this together. So Mumbai FinTech Hub is the FinTech vertical of the government of Maharashtra and is focused on the growth of the fintech sector in the state with a number of different mandates. But one of the key mandates that they have is helping build the fintech talent in the state through education and creating a pool of fintech talent that can then be used to drive the fintech sector. And Uday is the flagship fintech education program of the Mumbai FinTech Hub. And it focuses on assisting students like yourselves who joined in today who are interested in pursuing careers in the fintech space by equipping you with the relevant knowledge and information that you need to explore such careers. So what we've done is we've created these Uday knowledge sessions that specifically focus on providing you with relevant fintech knowledge directly from the industry experts themselves. So every week we've been inviting people from the field who really have a strong perspective of how the different fintech models work, and we've invited them to give you their perspective on what those core concepts are, as well as what are the skill sets that would be needed by you to pursue such a career. And today we're really excited to invite Mr. Nitin Jain, co-founder of Off Business. Off Business, as I'm sure a lot of you have heard and are aware of, has really established itself as a key player in the MSME lending space with an innovative approach to the whole flow-based lending concept. They set up a strong network of suppliers and built lending solutions at the point of that interaction in commerce. And it's a really unique model for us to explore. We're really excited to have Nitin to talk us through how he sees this space and how the larger supply chain finance is really evolved from a fintech standpoint. Nitin himself has over 12 years of in different areas, including the action. He's launched another company called OIB Farm as well. So we're really excited to have him today and to drive the session and give you his perspective. Before I hand it over to Nitin, just a few housekeeping rules. As with all our sessions, we always want these to be as interactive as possible. And therefore, what we would request you all to do is please take the opportunity to ask your questions. Nitin will, of course, cover some of the key topics, so you can pose your questions based on what he covers. But what you can do is you can use the Q&A feature in the WebEx facility. So if you all are logged in from your laptop or your computers, as you can see right now on the screen, there's a black button with 3 dots which gives you a Q&A option. So if you select that option, a chat window will open up where you can post your questions to us. Do make sure that you choose the all panelists option so that it comes to us, and then what we'll do is we'll keep fielding your questions throughout the session with Nitin for him to answer. If you are logged in from your phone, that's again a similar flow. You have this black button with 3 dots, choose the Q&A feature, choose all panelists, and then type in your question. Do feel free to send in your questions. As I said, we want this to be interactive, and we're really looking forward to having that conversation and exchange with Nitin. But I think that's about it. Without much further ado, over to you, Nitin.
Thank you so
much. If you have Nitin's slides, I think you can just present them. Sorry, Nitin, go ahead. Over to you.
No, thank you so much, Avnish. Would love to speak to all the students and young entrepreneurs who joined us about the various supply chain models and various fintech models that are there in the current ecosystem, and what are the kind of opportunities that exist within this particular ecosystem. So I would love to request Prateek to put up my presentation. I've got a short, I think 4 or 5 slide presentation, which will help me structure my thoughts as well, and will help the audience in terms of understanding.
Sorry, Nitin, but I haven't received your email. Not sure.
No worries. So let me just see. Give me 1 second. In any case, I can always start off. So we don't really need a presentation, to be very honest. So I'll give you a bit of background about what Off Business is all about and what we are doing. So we started this company in 2015. opportunity where SMEs we felt were very underserved by the banks. So an SME's working capital requirement is 30% of the working capital requirement is only served by the banks. So remaining 70%, they basically look for informal ways of borrowing through traders by taking raw materials from them on credit. So we figured out this opportunity and we felt the traders were overcharging the SMEs in terms of the raw material supply and in terms of giving them credit. So this is an opportunity that we found out in 2015, and what we saw was that we can lower the cost of capital for these SMEs, as well as lower the cost of for the SMEs at the same time. So this was a huge sector that really excited us. It was in the B2B space, and it was something which was away from the limelight at that point of time. Because you remember during the 2013, 14, 15 era, the B2C companies like the Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, Shopclues of the world were taking center stage. They were all B2C, business to consumers facing companies. What we essentially thought that if we focus on the B2B space, which is kind of away from the limelight, we will be able to solve more pressing problems that exist in the ecosystem, and we will be able to serve those SMEs that are not really being served by the banks in the most convenient of matters. So we found that 70% working capital gap that exists, and then we tried to tackle that. So what we did is that we formed an NBFC called Oxiso Financial Services Private Limited, which gave working capital unsecured lines to the SMEs. And against the lines, we never give the SMEs money. We always aggregate raw materials. So raw materials such as steel, aluminum, chemical, rubber, things like agri-commodities as well, like wheat, maize, sugar, spices, and so on and so forth. We said that if the manufacturer essentially is taking the material on credit, he is essentially paying 2 to 3% per month for availing those credit facilities from traders, and that's supposed to be the informal credit that exists in the market. So we found out that particular gap.
To the SMEs by borrowing at a cheaper rate from us, one, and also we wanted to aggregate raw materials so that effective pricing that he gets for the raw materials is cheaper compared to what he gets from the traders. So if you talk about the fintech landscape as such, there is a B2C landscape whereby there is lending which is done to individuals, there is wealth management which is done for individuals, there is insurance, payments, regulatory, and platform which is done for individuals itself. Now, if you talk about lending, then there are various companies such as Lendbox, Finzi, which exist in the P2P lending space, and there are obviously gold loan companies as well, like Rupeek, India Gold, as well as Muthoot, who do B2C lending. Then there is wealth management as well. Wealth management is done by guys like Moneyview, IndWealth, and there are companies like Zerodha, etc. At the same time, who essentially are the brokerage firm in the B2C space. Then you come to the insurance space, which is Policybazaar and Acko. Then you come to the payment space, which is Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm. Then you basically come to the regulatory space where there are several people like ClearTax and so on and so forth, trying to solve the regulatory aspect of the B2C fintech landscape. Then last but not the least, there are platforms as well, which essentially borrow money from banks at a cheaper rate. There is Bank Bazaar, Paisabazaar, and so on and so forth. So this is the B2C fintech landscape that exists in India at the moment. So if you go to the next slide, Prateek, there the B2B landscape is fairly similar in nature in terms of categories, but very different in terms of operations. So the B2B landscape is where there is a lot of invoice discounting, SME, unsecured, secured lending, which is done by us, Lending Card, Capital Float, iFinance, Incred, and invoice discounting. The platform services are given by CredX, and so on and so forth. There is wealth management, there is insurance for B2B, then there are payment gateways such as Razorpay and other companies such as Turtlemint, etc. Not Turtlemint, JustPay, who are doing the payments part. Then there is regulatory aspect who help the companies with filing GST returns, income tax returns such as Ease My Credit, Ease My GST. Then there are other platforms as well, which essentially help them borrow money at cheaper rates. So they are basically like DSA platforms, or they're basically platforms which connect the SMEs to various banks and NBFCs so that they can effectively reduce the cost of borrowing. If you go to the next slide, Prateek, please. If you go to the next slide, Prateek. Yeah, thank you. So the MSMEs in India, we chose to target the SMEs of India because they are at the commanding heights of the economy. They cater to 40% of the GDP. They cater to 8 crores roughly employment. They are the size of the core sector is 300 billion, and it's highly fragmented as well. And the raw material requirement for any kind of SME is about 60 to 70% of the revenue. So if an SME is selling 100 rupees worth of material to its anchor, it would be buying close to 60 to 70% is much higher raw material from the market, and that is the raw material it would be buying on credit, because the common way to work in the Indian ecosystem at least is to borrow 30% from the bank or set a working capital limit with the bank, which is secured against your asset, and remaining 70% you essentially end up borrowing from the traders or the distributors, and they essentially give you credit for 15 days, 30 days, but they charge a bomb for that. So this is the space in which we are operating in, and we feel that there's a huge amount of opportunity in this particular space. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So if you look at an SME cluster, right? What is an SME cluster? Let's say there is Maruti, which exists, and that's an MNC. So if a Maruti makes a factory in and around Manesar, then you would see within a year or two, you would see many SMEs circling around that particular factory, because essentially Maruti assembling, and it maintains just-in-time inventory. It assembles and then ships off the cars to its distributors. It does not maintain a huge amount of inventory. So the SMEs essentially end up supplying to Maruti. The traders end up supplying to SMEs, get the material from the large manufacturers. Now, if you look at the payment cycles, so what the SMEs need to do is that the SMEs need to maintain some inventory in their warehouse. That inventory can be approximately 30 days inventory. That means if they're doing a turnover of 12 crores annually, they would need crore at any point in time in their factory. So that's 1 crore worth of inventory they maintain out of 12 crore revenue that they do. And then Maruti also essentially pays between 21 to 30 days. During COVID time, this 21 to 30 days is essentially stretched to 60 days. So Maruti is never going to default, or the probability of default by Maruti is going to be very, very small. So they're guaranteed their payments, but the payments may get delayed due to various factors. So if you imagine that an SME takes 30 days to manufacture a raw material, keeps 30 days of inventory, and gets his payment in 30 days time from Maruti, effectively what it's doing is that it needs 90 days of working capital, 30 days of inventory, 30 days of manufacturing, and 30 days of essentially realizing the payments from the anchor. So 90 days of payments, they have to go and fulfill this gap. Usually they end up fulfilling 30% of this gap from the banks, and 70% of this gap is fulfilled by the traders that exist in the market. Now, what are the problems that SMEs typically face in the supply chain is that, one, they need financial access, right? So they have very limited assets to securitize or to lend to the bank. So they may have a land, or they may have a property of some kind, which they would give to the bank, and against that get a credit limit. So that asset basically is securitized, pledged to a bank, and the bank essentially charges anywhere between 8 to 10% annually. Now, the remaining working capital is essentially fulfilled by the vendors or the traders that exist in the market, and that is extremely expensive. That costs around 2 to 3% per month, which is 24 to 36% per annum. Now, the huge amount of difference is because the traders essentially are very local in nature, the traders are opportunistic in nature, and the traders do not operate on a very standardized model. The traders essentially will see where I can earn a lot of money. The traders will see how desperately the SME needs material, and then will charge credit cost as well as material cost accordingly. So what we are trying to do essentially is that help the SMEs with financial access and easy financial access by giving them a credit line at very, very affordable rates. Obviously, they will be higher than the bank rates because it's unsecured in nature. And secondly, we help reduce the cost of working capital and the cost of raw material purchases at the same time, effectively reducing the overall cost that the SME incurs. So if the SME essentially is borrowing at 24 to 36% from the traders, we essentially help them reduce that borrowing cost to 12 to 14%. That's how low we bring it down to. The second thing we help the SMEs with is that we help them increase their buying power, and what they say is that they are limited to only speaking to a few suppliers. We help them connect to over 2,000 suppliers so that the cost of raw material purchases is lowered for them. We remove the middlemen, we remove the price discovery aspect, we remove the problem of the price discovery aspect so that we help them get prices very easily and from multiple suppliers, and we also remove the problem of frequent follow-ups. So we essentially cover the trust efficiency. So going to the third point, we also help them pick out orders from the market which they just to. For example, if they're sitting out of Faridabad, orders from Hyderabad, Kerala, or people sitting outside India. So essentially, we give them that entire access. So if they operate in capacity, we essentially can go 80 to 90%, even 100% capacity. This is the tip. This is the problem that we're trying to solve for the SMEs. Now, SMEs essentially, if you look at it, they face problems highlighted here. The major problem that they face is that no one is ready to give them working capital, and to give them working capital either against security or it's against raw material, and it's very expensive. So once you lower the cost of working capital for them, you lower the cost of raw material purchases from them, automatically the SMEs essentially have that wiggle room where they can increase their profits and they can reinvest the profits in R&D and essentially compete with the likes of China and Middle East, or not Middle East, sorry, with the likes of Brazil, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and India. Historically been a very has not been a very technologically advanced nation. So what we essentially are helping them do, we are helping them reduce their cost down for the purchase of raw material, and thereby they can spend a lot more time and money in terms of R&D, increasing their technology, thereby competing with the world power. So this is what we are trying to do, and how we are trying to solve the supply chain exists in the fintech at the moment. Now, if you talk about functions that exist at OFB or in fintech, right, and what are the career options that you can potentially pursue? The first function that you will find is sales, right? Because it's very generate revenue for any kind of organization. So you have to meet with clients. You have to basically figure out what is their issue. You have to figure out what is the problem that you're trying to solve with the client. For the client, you're trying to solve out financial need for the client, the amount, the quantum, what interest rates is he looking for? Why is he looking for credit? Is he looking for capital expansion? That means he's looking to buy. Client is looking to buy raw material. That means he needs working capital, right? So you for two reasons. One is you need capital for expanding your factory or your machines. That's capital expenditure. And second is for operating expenditure, where you need to buy raw materials to be able to produce more finished goods for your anchors. So that's first is sales, right? The second function that exists in a fintech is underwriting. Now, why is underwriting important? Because if you see the first three letters of fintech, it's fin, right? FIN. It's financial. So you have to be able to assess the financial health of a particular company before giving it some kind of lending lines. Now, if you make a mistake there, then your entire principal is at risk. So let's say you end up earning between 12 to 15% annually on whatever you're lending out. For those 12 to 15% annually, you're risking 100 rupees of capital. So you have to be very, very careful in terms of who you lend to, and where is your money being deployed. Can your money be siphoned off? Because a lot of problems have existed in India where the money taken from banks or NBFCs or other people have been siphoned off into they're going into building properties for you. They're basically going into expensive vacations, expensive cars. So many of the industrialists have been guilty. Many of the industrialists as well as SMEs have been guilty of such practice. So essentially, it's very important to underwrite the SME. So underwriting is a function that is very, very detailed oriented. Sales is a function of slight flair, communicating with the client, building a rapport, building a relationship, because you, in the B2B world, at least you'll be dealing in large ticket sizes. But underwriting is more about pushing back, taking less risk, being risk averse, making sure that the company is not taking inordinate risk, and whenever there is a risk to be taken, there is a price that is being received for that particular risk. So underwriting is that particular function. The third function is operations and supplier side, whereby you deal with the suppliers wherever you're making the payment or wherever you're procuring you essentially deal with the supplier side, because we've got close to 2,000 to 2,500 suppliers on our platform. It's very important to deal with the suppliers to make sure that they're not cheating the customers, they're not sending wrong material, and they're basically being paid on time. They give us the best kind of pricing, and so on and so forth. That's why the operations side is very important as well. That again requires a lot of detail, that requires a lot of patience, that requires a lot of diligence at the same time. So that it does not really require to be very good with numbers and financial statements or balance sheets, but that requires you to study a person, whether that person is capable of committing fraud, or can you be taken for a ride. So that's very important as a function, to make sure that you understand the business and the function very, very well, or understand the supplier very, very well, and be able to communicate with the supplier effectively. The fourth function that exists in a fintech is finance, capital raising. This is, I believe, one of the most important functions, because if you don't have capital, you will not be able to lend out capital, right? So you need to be able to raise capital, and capital raising can be done only in two ways. Either you raise equity capital or you raise debt capital. So whenever you want to raise debt capital, you need to have a certain amount of equity in the company, because whenever you're raising debt capital, you will be judged on the kind of leverage you're about to take, allowed to take. And for us, the leverage hovers between 2 and 3. It's around the 3 mark. That means if you raise 1 rupee of equity capital, you're allowed to raise between 2 and 3 rupees of debt capital. So the overall capital that we will be playing with, it will be 3 plus 1, that is 4 rupees of capital. So it's very important to raise capital at the right price. So equity basically determines your valuation, so depending on how much equity you want to raise, how much you want to dilute, that essentially goes for your valuation. The debt capital essentially is done at a fixed rate of interest. That rate can be anywhere between 8 to 10%. Or even 8 to 12%. If it's a very new NBFC, then the rate will be in and around 12 to 13%. If it's a very it's established NBFCs with a proven track record, the rate will be around 8.5–9%. It's the capital raising aspect essentially determines how much profit you can generate from the NBFC business, and how effectively you can lend to your client, and how much exposure can you take on a per client basis, or how much essentially capital can you put to work. The fifth aspect is finance, which is the commercial aspect, that is dealing with the banks. Essentially, when you're trying to negotiate all kinds of deals with the banks, because your money is lying with the banks, your float is lying with the banks, and plus you have to make invoices, you have to make sure your systems are perfect, your invoices are being generated on time, the interest invoices go to the customers, the customers pay on time. So that kind of commercial aspect is important as well, because ultimately you can generate all the revenue you want, but if you're not able to realize the revenue, there is no use, absolutely zero use. The last aspect, but not the least in any kind of way, is the last 4 letters of fintech, which is tech, which is TECH, right? So that's technology. Now, technology is important for 2 or 3 aspects. So the first aspect why technology is important is because it helps you operate in a very, very efficient manner, and it removes any kind of pilferage, it removes any kind of inefficiency that exists in the system. So the technology aspect helps you really lower your costs. So you don't need to don't need to deploy 100 people to do the job, where a computer and about 5 people will be able to do the same job. So it helps you reduce the cost. It helps you bring efficiency into the ecosystem. It helps you operate with a certain kind of comfort that yes, nothing is going wrong or nothing can go wrong. So that's technology. That's the first aspect that the technology solves. The second aspect that the technology solves is really it helps you generate a lot of leads or a lot of clients who can essentially bring you business. So for us, technology has been both the driver of our business as well as the enabler of our business, and hence we have been very lucky to have a very, very strong tech team, which essentially has been responsible for driving our profits up. Whereas a lot of NBFCs at this point of time are struggling due to technology not being able to raise capital at a good rate. We are sitting at a very decent position where we find comfort in terms of the lending rates that we have, the borrowing rates that we have, as well as the technology that we have as well to drive the particular business. So chain aspects. So these are the functions that you should be thinking about. If you're kind of a person who likes to speak to customers a lot, tries to get deals done, feels the highs and lows when the deals are done or deals are not done, needs that adrenaline, sales may be a very good function for you, right? And if you are someone who wants to look at finances, who wants to basically study in detail, who wants to look at whether this company will survive in the next 2 to 3 years, or if this company is likely to go bust or default on the payments, and basically you are someone who is very risk calculative in your head, and you really want to take it slow and you really want to be very diligent about it, then underwriting may be the function for you. Same with operations. So operations is very much like underwriting, because you end up essentially ensure that the supplier not essentially cheating you, and so that also requires a lot of diligence. Although not as much diligence as under want to understand about equity raising, debt raising, dealing with other NBFCs, dealing with your partners who essentially give you services, and you have to negotiate the cost of those services with them. Then finance may be an operation for you. So finance essentially is a very, very important function, because again, for us, it's not only a function which controls the cost, but it's also a function that helps us maintain processes, maintain systems, and keeps a tight control over the systems as well. Now, if you're someone who likes coding, who likes essentially solving a process problem by going deep into a process and by figuring out a technology solution to it, or essentially figuring out how we can start doing business that we're doing offline and making sure that we do the business online, then technology may be a good fit for you. So technology also includes product, where we essentially look at UI UX. We essentially look at how customers interact with the website, interact with the technology. So that's product. These were the 5-6 slides that I made. I hope everyone's got a very good idea about what is a supply chain finance. Supply chain finance is where either you're solving. So supply chain finance consists of 2 things. One, when you're selling something to your anchor and the anchor pays you in 30 or 60 or 90 days, you essentially discount those bills and pay the money to the SME. For him or for the SME to continue operations without any hassles or without any problems. That's called sales bill discounting. That's an essential part of supply chain finance. The second part of supply chain finance, you are discounting the purchase, where the SME is procured. The manufacturers longer working capital cycle to meet overall
fitting aspect of it. The third aspect of supply chain finance is where you have a lot of inventory. You lien, once you lien the inventory, you are able to generate working capital against that particular inventory. So that's the supply chain aspect of finance. Answer a lot of questions and would basically be very open to essentially discussing what are the various aspects, what does it entail, what are the stresses of the job, etc., etc. So feel free to ask any kind of questions that you have. Would be very happy to answer.
Thanks a lot, Nitin. I think that's been really helpful, really good session in terms of going through the different kinds of functions and roles. And we also have quite a few questions, so I'll start posing them to you. Maybe we'll first look at the more of the business model and lending pieces, and then towards the latter half, I'll go back into, and I think you also covered that extensively in terms of careers and skill sets and roles. We'll go into that. To start off with, so one of the questions relating to like an earlier slide you had shown where the off-business model, in terms of, of course, there is the whole lending aspect, but you all have built that entire offering around this slide itself, Pradeep, around the one with the buyer power and all, around a platform that provides MSMEs with access to suppliers and access to those inputs. Right? So one of the questions that we received is, and this is a unique approach, say, compared to the more traditional lending approach, where you just go with a lending product and go and distribute such products. You over here, your distribution is around a consumption point and is around a more larger marketplace. So in your off-business journey, this innovation that you all brought in, how did you all go about building this? Like, what was the starting point? It's a bit of a chicken egg problem, I guess, to bring suppliers without having MSMEs to bring MSMEs.
That's a wonderful question, Avnish. So what we essentially did initially is that we wanted to just become a platform like Amazon's and the Flipkarts of the world in the B2B space, right? We be putting commodities on our platform, and people will hopefully the commodities of your platform because we'll be able to remove the price discovery aspect. We month into journey, we realize that the real problem around which everything is centered is not the pricing of the commodities. It is essentially the availability of credit and the working capital cycle, and essentially matching the working capital cycle to the working capital cycle of the SME. It was a 4 to journey. We essentially pivoted after that, after being only aggregators in the beginning. We pivoted immediately a lending or a credit centric company with services attached to it. So we in the market are known as Lender Plus Plus. So where we are a primary lender into the market, and then what we do around it is add services like procurement, where you can find cheaper raw materials. And right now we're doing about 200 crores of just steel procurement, which is our biggest category per month. And that's a huge part of our portfolio, and we are very proud of it because we are able to generate value for the clients, not only on the lending aspect, but other aspects as well. We have recently also started, as I said, there's a platform for us called bidassist.com, which helps with all the SMEs and all the other corporations look at tenders that are available in the market, and we help them essentially win those tenders by, again, making credit available, as well as ease of the tender availability is something that we solved. So these two aspects we try to plug in into the credit core, and we wish to solve other problems essentially of the SMEs as well. So if you look at the COVID times, right? During the COVID times, what happened is that most of the migrant laborers, they went back to their native places, due to which there was a huge amount of shortage in the factories. So even if they wanted to open the factories, they could not, because there was no one to do the works. Now, what we are trying to do is that also trying to aggregate and we also trying to form tie up with a lot of partners so that the availability of laborers is made very simple for the SMEs. Imagine an SME sitting out of Faridabad in a small location, sector 56 or sector 64, Faridabad. how will it be able to find out laborers? And if you go to any kind of website, you will never be able to generate this kind of aggregation or this kind of availability. So we tried to solve this problem by because we have a huge client base. So we asked all the clients, and we then tied up with a lot of suppliers. We tried to essentially get laborers in one um, onto one platform, so that whatever ad hoc requirements our clients have, we are able to fulfill. So this was the third thing that we solved, and this was a problem that we solved particularly during the COVID times, because before that this was not even considered to be a problem. The last aspect that we're trying to solve for the SMEs, which is very painful for them, is the technology aspect, because right now still, if you look at the SMEs and the supply chain ecosystem, they still file GST returns manually. They still do invoicing manually. They still are not very tech savvy, where they just operate as per verbal communication or WhatsApp communication. So there are no real systems and processes in place. So we essentially help them with systems and processes as well, that we've developed for our own company, because we know that it's just a plug and play into their system. So that's also something that we are helping out the SMEs with. To answer your question, how did we come to this aspect? We started off with aggregation, then we realized that credit was a major problem. Then we moved to a credit first approach, and that's something that really took off for us, because we realized that that was the major problem to solve. All the other problems, once the credit problem is solved, can be easily taken care of, easily.
No, thanks. That's really interesting, and thank you for that insight in terms of that journey, and particularly, like you said, the mixture between credit forming the base and also having a play in all these different service places. And I think that possibly leads into the next question that somebody's asked, which is from the acquisition side. You know, the whole SME lending traditional model has always been plagued with a very high cost of acquisition. And of course, the fintech models, we've seen various different kinds of fintech models that have tried to tackle that. I think you kind of alluded to some of that through what you were just mentioning in your last answer, but how has our business or your fintech model gone about trying to tackle that in terms of making it a more viable
Again, that's
business?
a very interesting question, and would tell you 2 or 3 ways how people are. We are doing it slightly differently. One way of tackling it is that you go and put Google ads. You go and register yourself with the websites such as Policy Bazaar and Bank Bazaar and so on and so forth, and you essentially offer business loans to the customers. Now, that's one way of doing it. That's a digital presence, right? And then some people promise 10-minute loans or 1-hour loans or 2-hour loans, but the ticket sizes are limited between 1 to 5 lakhs. For us, we believe that the approach did not work, because we have underwriting as the key aspect of our credit function, right? We believe that if the underwriting is weak, or if we start giving a little bit of levy on the underwriting aspect, we will never be able to generate a very rock solid business. So for us, we decided as a company that we are going to do slightly larger ticket sizes. Our average ticket sizes are in the 20, 30, 35 lakhs. We said that we are going to be doing working capital only. We are not going to be doing business loans. We are going to be looking at SMEs with a greater than 5 crore of turnover. That means that they have proper audit reports. They have a 2-year vintage. So essentially, once we look at a slightly larger ticket sizes, automatically the CAC, or the customer acquisition cost, reduces. Or even if it doesn't reduce, of revenue generated, it definitely reduces, right? So if you're doing, let's say, if you're spending a lot of money on Google ads, or if you're spending a lot of money with the partner organizations to source 5 lakh deals or 1 lakh deals, and essentially you have to spend a lot of money in terms of collections, in terms of underwriting, and we spend the same amount of money, but we essentially go for deals which are 30 to 35 lakhs. So essentially your customer acquisition cost heavily reduces. So that's a practice that we have followed. That's worked very well for us. So how do we source customers? So we have 2 or 3 ways of sourcing customers. We believe that self-sourcing, or going to your own network, or picking up a cluster, Faridabad or Sangli or Pune, and then going deep into that cluster is the right approach. We do not believe in spreading ourselves too thin. So for example, if we are sitting out of Chennai, we will go to nearby places in Chennai, and we will make sure that we hit all the industrial clusters, and we pick out the best of the SMEs, and look at the books, and then sanction limits, and get kick started, because the product is the product itself is very unique, and it offers dual or triple benefits to the clients. So the word of mouth really works in our favor. So what we do is that most of our leads, in fact 60% of our leads that we get, are referred to us by existing clients. So that's a very important aspect how we essentially end up sourcing. So what we do essentially is that if it's a new cluster, we will try and convert 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 clients, and then after that, automatically due to word of mouth, the references start flowing, and then incoming inquiries start happening. So we don't market, or we don't need to market, or we don't need to have a strong digital presence in the customer acquisition, right? So that's the second way of acquiring. The third way of acquiring is because we offer aggregation services, and because we have a proprietary platform called bidassist.com. What that does is that it generates a lot of leads for us. So if someone wants raw materials, he's not really looking for credit, but if we offer him raw material pricing, which exists in the market with 30 days credit, and we essentially go and analyze his credit and offer him that kind of credit, he will jump and take it. So that's something that we've realized, that the inbound inquiries for raw material purchasing, they turn out to be good credit customers, because the ones who want to purchase on advance, but we essentially get them, we give them additional benefit by analyzing and giving credit. Because once you start giving credit, right, credit is the hook which retains the customer for you. If you're doing only aggregation, then even if you drop pricing by 0.1 rupee, the person is going to go somewhere else. So we believe that locking them into credit, or essentially giving them the credit service as the essential core, is very key. So that's a third way we essentially generate customers and leads for ourselves. And all our customers, or all our customer acquisition costs, or LTV to CAC, we are positive. We were positive in a very short time. LTV is long-term value, and CAC is customer acquisition cost. So that essentially worked. The approach worked very well for us.
No, thanks, Nitin. I think that's really interesting, and for the students, in terms of your strategy for increasing your ROI for the same customer acquisition cost, is a really interesting insight. I think the next one is moving into the underwriting piece, and as you mentioned, that's the core around your business. There are a few questions on this, so maybe I'll try and combine them into one question. Along the lines of, in the process of managing risk, I guess one aspect is getting access to digitized data to make your underwriting and analytical models work much faster and much more efficiently.
Yeah.
Do you all want to, if you have any thoughts around any ways in which you've been able to manage that? And there's another question that talks about, is there a big risk that you're undergoing by looking at giving unsecured loans to SMEs? If you want to answer that as well as part of your underwriting piece in terms of your strategy, or what
Thanks so much for that. So again, an important question, right? Because everything is centered around risk. If your risk function is not strong, or if you're not really underwriting very well, then you essentially are like a house of cards, right? It can come falling down at any point of time. So unsecured loans, yes, they are risky, but if you're able to price the risk, and if you're able to underwrite very well, it works, right? I mean, to give you an example, yes, you can give a loan to anyone, right? But as soon as you start pricing the loan appropriately, then you will realize. So there are clients out there, or there are companies out there giving loans at 30 to 35% interest rates as well. And I'm not making up these numbers. So there is a company, without taking names, they do 30 to 35%. They have a very different approach. They may be operating at around 10% or 12% NPAs. So effectively, if you're lending at 30% with 12% NPAs, you're making a net ROI from the customers of 80%, and let's say your cost of capital is around 10% odd, so you're making 8% odd as your net interest margin after NPA deduction. Now we follow a different philosophy there. We said that we're not going to go into the very risky side of the ecosystem. Yes, there are clients who would be willing to take at 30-35%, but we are going to be basically sticking at in and around 15 to 18%, or 12 to 15%, depending on secured or unsecured. And we are going to be operating at those levels with an NPA that we hope to maintain in and around the 1.25% level. So that's the approach that we have followed, and that's again worked very well for us, because we essentially work at in and around for average cost of our average yield that we manage to generate from the clients, including our lending and aggregation businesses, in and around 22 to 24%. we have 1 to 1.5% NPAs. And we have a cost of capital, let's say an average of about 10%. So we are able to generate a NIM of close to about 12%, and that's one of the best in the industry. And we have followed this philosophy, and again, it's worked for us. But it's not to say that the other philosophy may not work. But we as a company have that kind of DNA. So we do not want to go into very risky ends. You can always give a loan to Vijay Mallya, right? But the hoping for a recovery, or the interest rates are not going to be around 15%. They're going to be much, much, much higher. They're going to be backed by solid collateral, and so on and so forth. So a risk has to be backed by the pricing. So everything can be priced in this world, right? Everything can be priced. It's just about how to put a price to something that you are willing to lend or willing to buy. So that's how we solve that particular aspect. Amish, what was your second question?
Yeah, so in terms of the underwriting approach you take, like how do you all get access to the... Correct, yes.
So again, we operate very differently to how the market operates, right? So the market only relies on the documents that they get from the customers, or the documents that are available in the public domain, such as CIBIL or CRILIC reports or other such reports. But we essentially, along with those reports, we also rely on the network feedback, and we speak to at least 10 suppliers. We try and get the feedback from at least 10 suppliers as well. And we basically marry both the supplier side feedback as well as the financial and the documentational feedback to come out with a final number, or a final kind of result. The result can be yes or no. If it's a yes, then how much limit do we need to set? So both these aspects marry together to come out with a final result. So that's something that we follow.
Thanks, Nitin. I think moving to the other side of things, so there's a question asking about now in terms of, like you mentioned, you yourself have an NBFC license.
Yeah.
As an NBFC, have you all found getting access to liquidity yourselves has been an issue during these COVID times? Or have there been any strategies in that sense in terms of how you'll manage that?
So one thing, our business model essentially generated liquidity for us, right? Because our business model is to give short-term working capital loans which are revolving in nature. Now, if our clients during the COVID times did not have any work, did not have any new projects, so they essentially returned back the money to us, and that itself helped us generate a decent amount of liquidity. But if you're looking at people who do long-term loans, and we have only 5% of our portfolio into long-term loans, but people who do long-term loans essentially are lending long-term but borrowing short-term. So whenever the tap stops from the back end, so that's what happened with DHFL as well as ILFS. Whenever the tap stops from your borrowers, then you will face a lot of pain. So that's something that we avoided by again in building or having a business model which takes care of all these aspects for us. So during the COVID times, in fact, we had excess liquidity, and we were facing the reverse problem of a negative drag, which we tried to solve by moving into a slightly more secured space, by buying off books from other NBFCs, by buying off books that correspond to our business models, because other NBFCs seem to be struggling in terms of raising capital, but we, on the other hand, had a very different and opposite kind of problem.
Thanks. No, I think that's really interesting in terms of showing how the way you are structured your business model really has such implications from all angles. I think thank you for that insight. I think that covers also very well the question that was asked. I'm going to ask one more question from this perspective before going into the career side of things. So there's a question along the lines of the Open framework that has recently come, the OCEN framework that has recently come out, and the question is, the recently announced Open framework, has that formed any part of business's overall strategy? Do you see that as being
elaborate a little bit on the OCEN framework?
So we're talking about the Open Credit Enablement Network that iSpurt has recently come up, where they've created a frame.
Yeah. So I mean, we haven't really looked very deeply into that, to be very honest with you. So I will probably reserve my judgment and opinions before looking deeply into that.
Sure. I think there's one last piece. There was another question that came in, which was, and I think you mentioned the effects of the lockdown and
Yeah.
how that led to some new opportunities. One, of course, in terms of your liquidity, but also in terms of you're able to getting into new forms of business very quickly. And I
Yeah.
think that's also a testament to the fintech model itself compared to, say, incumbents in terms of the ability of fintechs to really respond very quickly and move very quickly into new areas. So, just generally, more from a fintech standpoint, do you have any thoughts for the students on the call? Like, what is it about the fintech setup that allows you to do that, have that flexibility, or is it got to do with the talent that you have or the mindset? I think that'll be a good segue
So
into
we,
what are the
yeah, so
capabilities in it.
we follow the 3 P's framework that we define for ourselves, right? So, and the first P essentially is process. So once you have a very tight process, once you have very tight controls, then you can see all your costs coming down. You can see all the pilferages being knocked out. You can see all the leakages being plugged in, right? That's the first aspect, process. And you can always through process remove any kind of risks or any kind of undue risks or in that you intend to take. That's the first P. The second P is that you need to generate a decent amount of pace in the system. So if you're like sort of lethargic and you're not taking enough steps to making sure that you're generating revenue or you're generating new aspects of the business and you're helping your company grow, that's going to hold you back. So we essentially use pace as a part of the DNA of the organization. The third very important P is profit, right? So I think most of the startups, as you would hear, most of them are burning money or losing money left, right, and center. So that's something that we have managed to profit is something that we managed to inculcate in the DNA. So in 2015, when we incorporated the company, in 2017 end of year, we managed to become profitable, and we have been profitable for every month except for the month of April this year, where we were losing money due to the negative drag. But every month we have been profitable, and that is not EBITDA profitability, that is PBT, or profit before tax, and profit after tax profitability. So these are the 3 P's. Once you incorporate in your DNA, you imbibe that in the culture of the organization, and then once this happens, then automatically you will see that you will become very stable business, and you will essentially be a business which will not essentially grow at the rate of knots, but at the same time grow very well, grow about 200%, 300% year on year, and at the same time make a decent amount of money as well.
Fantastic. So moving to that same thought of having that DNA inbuilt in you, the way you function and the way your organization functions and what skill sets people use, I think you very aptly covered the different functions as the slide shows. I think one common question that comes across is, what is the level of technical skill that you need to be able to do this job? So of course, you have a lot of engineers who say have coding skills. Does that make a difference when you're looking at people you're hiring? You also have an equal mix of people who don't have that background. But what is your take on that in terms of the need for having technical skills versus functional knowledge in the space that
So
you're in?
out of the function that I've listed, right? So only 2 of the functions really need those specific skills, right? One of them is technology. You need to have those that coding mindset, that algorithmic mindset, and that process mindset, because that is tech, right? So in technology, you cannot do without that, unfortunately. So you cannot expect a civil engineer to come and instantly gain coding skills and then become very good at it. No, it's sort of, your background matters a lot, whether you are you have been from a computer science engineering background, or you had a decent amount of exposure in that particular field. That really, in my mind, that impacts whether you'll be able to do well in technology or not. I may be wrong, because although I am a computer science engineer, but I am not in that particular field, right? So I may be completely wrong, but that's what I feel in technology. Second aspect, you need to, I think, have some kind of basic skills and some kind of skills in the underwriting aspect, right? So when you underwriting, you need to have some kind of a financial background, because if you don't do that, then you will not know how to learn or how to read the balance sheets and the financial statements properly, and you may be you may be prone to making mistakes. So apart from these functions, I personally do not think you need any specific skill set. All you need is a person who's hungry and who's ready to hustle and who's ready to essentially be open to learning new things and growing. That's what I personally believe. So in sales, like okay, so my background is that I'm a computer science engineer from IIT Delhi. Went to London, did 7 years of investment banking, right? Nothing to do with sales. But when I came back, I found that sales is an aspect that I really enjoyed, because you get to meet multiple people, you get to form relationships, then you essentially understand the requirements, and then you essentially try and design something around it, right? So that's not something that I did on the trading desk in London. But sales skill does not require a specific skill, to be very honest. It just requires you to be slightly extrovert, slightly more open-minded in terms of trying out new things, meeting with new people. So if you're someone who doesn't like meeting new people and who likes to analyze a problem, then underwriting may be the calling for you. If you're someone who likes to go out, who does not like to sit in a desk, like I'm a very restless person by nature, right? So I cannot sit at a desk. So for me, underwriting may not be the best function. Although I can do underwriting if forced to, because I know how to read financial statements, I know how to do all of that because I'm a CFA as well. But at the same time, it's not a function that I really enjoy. So it's very important to know what you really enjoy, because if you're a sales guy pushed into underwriting, you will never be able to do well. If you're underwriter forced to do sales, you'll never be able to do well. So both are equally important in their own aspects, in their own rights. So you just have to choose where what is it that you want to really do, and where are your skill sets, or what is it that you really enjoy. I think enjoyment is very important as part of the job.
I think that's a really apt way to possibly to end this session. I'm really glad you brought in your experience as well, because that was actually my next question. Final question was going to be to just briefly talk through your journey, and I think it's really interesting how you talked about how that has really varied over time and how your different skill sets have developed.
I had a purely desk job in London where I was trading in the European markets, but I wasn't meeting any kind of clients, right? So it used to be either on Bloomberg chat, or it used to be on the phone call. There were no physical meetings. I was required to manage risk of the portfolio and essentially hedge the risks and also take a little bit of risk myself. So that's a very different job requirement. And I kind of felt that I was missing something. So hence I really wanted to, come back to India and do something in on the sales side or on the business side of things, where I can go and meet multiple companies, multiple people, and learn from them, and essentially figure out how to solve the real world problem.
No, fantastic. No, thank you, Nitin. Really appreciate you taking out the time to this. I think it was a really fantastic session, not only in terms of getting insights into the whole supply chain space and how you guys have navigated and really innovated very quickly, but also some really good insights from a career standpoint. So really, thank you so much for your time today.
No problems at all. Thank you so much. All right.
And thank you to those who joined in. Yet again, really happy to see the participation and the kind of questions we saw from you all. Looking forward to continuing to have your participation. If you have any other questions that you'd like us to pass on to Nitin, happy to do that as well. But either way, we'd love to hear from you. I think we keep getting some good feedback, and that really helps us improve these sessions even more than what they are right now. So do reach out to us. The email address is flashing on your screens right now, admin@fintecheducation.com. We'd like to hear from you in terms of any other topics you'd like to hear from, or any other formats in which we can run these. But otherwise, for today, thank you again for everybody joining in, and have a good weekend. Thank you.